right, so you just launched this video, this coaching video.
Yeah, I
So
did.
before we get into it, can you go ahead and tell people how they can find it? Your YouTube channel is?
Yeah, I think if you just YouTube Daniel Recoder, the channel will pop up, I hope. And it should be the most recently uploaded video on there.
Awesome. Yeah, so I checked it out. Like you posted it like 4 seconds before we started this calls, but I got to watch
Yeah.
all of it. And it's interesting that you posted it now because myself and the Madison team has been having conversations about the relationship or the difference between like teaching and coaching and what those two things are. And I think one of the cooler
Uh,
parts about teaching in the marching arts, like indoor or DCI, is that you have to wear both of those hats, and not only have to wear them, you have to know really acutely when you should be wearing one or the other. So if you could kind of elaborate on what like, your thought process on how coaching integrates into the marching arts and how you use it as a teacher.
yeah, well, with coaching, I feel like the goal is to get the best effort out of somebody, help them understand their purpose, help them understand why they're doing what they're doing. So that way they're actually trying their hardest and not just going through the motions. And when you can pull that kind of energy out of somebody, if you can pull that kind of energy out of a large group of people, it's powerful. It's so powerful. And coaching, I think, also it involves understanding how to work with various personality types. Because obviously I'm going to be the same person, but I'm going to kind of tweak little elements of myself to help create harmony between the various personalities. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's intriguing, man. And it's as I was thinking about it and I was watching through your video, I was thinking about how there's like this two-step process. Like I think of it as like the teaching process, which I think tends to come first in the sense that you have this student that needs to understand this brand new concept. So then you kind of lay it out for
Hmm.
them in the way, kind of like you're talking about understanding personalities. You teach them, you lay it out for them in the way that they need to be able to understand it. But then, that's April camp and you're teaching this person for
Yes.
3 months. And so how do you
Yeah.
get that piece of information to be applied on a consistent basis, given all of the inevitable variables of the summer, the heat and, a potential lack of sleep and definitely the fatigue
Yeah.
and all of those things.
Yeah. That's where like the coaching comes in, and you kind of have to build a relationship. Yeah, you have to build a strong relationship with all of the people you're working with, not just a few of them, not just like the section leaders, but like every single person. They have to trust you. They You have to build a relationship to where they want to make you happy.
Mm,
They want this. They don't want to disappoint you. And that is its own challenge. That's its own challenge because that requires time and effort, not only inside rehearsal but also outside of rehearsal. And like in the drum corps setting, that the outside of rehearsal time, like there's so much you have to do with that, especially for the members. Like EPL, there's a lot, like especially when you're moving, there's so many things that they have to do. So I can't just like pull a member to the side for a whole hour
mhm.
of EPL. It's got to be short. It's got to be sweet. And I found that it's also helpful to kind of schedule things like that and just kind of keep track with scheduling. If I could talk, like the quad line typically is 4 or 5 people. It's one of the smallest sections, and it's so easy to just rotate through them all. Like, all right, I'm gonna talk to this person today during EPL, and then tomorrow this person knows I'm gonna talk to him for 10, 15 minutes, and the next day. So it just kind of cycles.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do that. I mean, you do that even if there isn't a problem per se at that moment. Like this is an active thing for you, just making sure that you're checking in with membership.
Oh, all the time. I gotta see. I've found it's very beneficial for me to see how they're doing, Helps me understand them. I also remember being a member and having those opportunities with the instructors that I've had, and it helps to feel heard, even though the instructor may not be able to solve all of the problems that members are going through. When people feel like they've been heard, um, it helps a lot. It helps to release that baggage. You
Definitely.
hold on to a lot of baggage. I call it luggage
Yeah.
in drum corps, and it's like I tell them your equipment is already heavy enough. Like the last
Especially
thing
for
you
quads.
need, exactly, the last thing you need is to be holding on to more baggage.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes I've found like when those moments happen when an instructor or a member or whoever is able to like honestly communicate, that action is enough to eliminate the problem. Like the problem might still exist, like you know what I mean, but just the fact that you've now been able to discuss it makes it not a problem anymore, and then it goes away
Yeah,
entirely.
yeah, and sometimes we have to bring all people together to discuss the thing, and it's got to
Mhm.
be outside of rehearsal, and it's got to be when they're not stressed out. Like, can you all finish rehearsal quickly, EPL, so we can use like 20-ish minutes before you have to be on the bus to get together and talk. Um, I feel like it's important to facilitate those conversations, and I don't necessarily go in there and tell people who's right or who's wrong.
Mhm.
I just kind of let people voice what it is they need to say and make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to speak if they want to, and that can help resolve quite a few issues.
Yeah, definitely. And as I imagine, like myself as a younger teacher, and I see it with a lot of people, I think it's an easy trap to fall in. Is you kind of teach autobiographically, like so this is the problem is like, okay, you're slow on the roll, and then you remember like, well, when I was slow on the roll, this is what I was told and that worked, and then you say that to them, which isn't inherently a bad thing. But if that doesn't work, as a teacher, it's easy to look at the student as the problem. Like, I know this information worked because, I can do it. So if it's not working for you, then it must be you. But instead, you have to, like you're saying, you have to know the
Mm-hmm.
individual, because that piece of information may have worked for you because it was perfectly tailored for you. And you have to be able to supply this student with that same understanding, which takes kind of the, relationship investment that you're talking about.
Yeah, and just like you said, people learn differently. People learn differently, and even though a bit of information may have worked for me at a particular time, somebody else might be in a different part of their journey where they're not able to fully comprehend or receive that kind of instruction yet. And if that's the case, like if you don't, it's going to take knowing that first in order to
Mm,
understand how you need to modify the information to get through, because it's not enough to just give the right feedback. It also has to be effective for the individual.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And that takes time. I think that's probably the biggest thing that deters people, because I think most people probably know that. But the difficulty is over the course of a summer, and when you're there, I mean, a drum corps day is packed pretty much to the brim. Like from when you wake up to when you go to bed, and you gotta like find those
Yeah.
little pockets of time to have those conversations and make sure that those relationships are developed. And I know that we've had this discussion before about how you do a lot of that stuff early season before the summer really
Hmm.
starts at camps and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that and what your preseason process is for developing those relationships?
Yeah. So I like last summer I started this note on my phone. I put all the members' names, and after they got their contracts, I remember being on the airplane home, and I need time to process like what I feel they need to work on. I feel like if I just tell them right there on the spot, it may not be worded as best I could, or it may not be the most. I guess that's the way to put it. It's not the most effective thing for them to hear yet. I need time to let it marinate. So on the airplane ride home, I put everyone's name. I've got like 5 hours on an airplane, and I think about one person at a time, and I play back um, how their playing was, how their personality was amongst everybody there, how receptive they were to feedback, how well they applied feedback. And from there, I'll make my own notes about what I think people need to work on. And after that, I'll schedule phone calls with them one at a time. And I first want to hear how they felt it went. You know, I have my own perception of how the audition goes, but I want to hear how they feel they did in their audition. And from there, I also want to hear what it is they want to gain from a season of drum corps, because that's a massive commitment. It
Yeah.
is massive, and you're literally selling your soul. And I would hope that if you're going to sell your soul to something, there's a reason you're doing that, and there's something that you want to gain. And that is also different for everybody. So call them, see what it is they want to gain from here, and I'll update my notes with that, because it's great to hear it, but it's also difficult to keep track of everything. But if I can keep that note and just go back to it, it will stick.
Yeah.
It will stick. And then from there, I can tailor my feedback or my goals for them towards what it is they want to achieve. That's pretty much the process. And
Yeah.
like, if you know that midsummer slump, it's an excellent time to go back to those goals and say, hey, you remember back in April when we spoke and you told me that you wanted this? You understand that your actions right now are not leading you towards that. So
Yeah. And you're
it's good to
using
have.
like their own goals and logic, not I don't know if against them is the right word, but for them, I guess, to be able to pull themselves out of
Yes.
that rut.
Yeah, it's a reminder to them as to why they chose to be here. And that reminder is very helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. I had Sean Clark on the podcast at one point in time, and he said that I had heard this concept, but for some reason the way he articulated it kind of stuck with me, which is spending time to save time. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of people, what you've just discussed, is hours of work before the season even starts just to get to know a member. That's a lot of work for a tech staff member to put on their back because they're already pretty busy people.
Yeah.
And so that I think is why some people don't do it. But then when you have that investment and you hit the hard points in the summer or the rough spots, the relationship that you've cultivated saves so much at that point in the
Yes.
summer,
Oh,
because
yeah.
I'm sure you've been involved in a season where you hit that rough spot and the foundation hasn't been laid to get you out of it, because it always happens. You know what I mean? With 3 months of that many people doing that stressful of an activity together,
Yeah.
it's gonna happen. But when you don't have that foundation set, you start to feel like we are not getting out of this. Like we're gonna have this problem until finals night, and we're all gonna feel terrible about it. And then, but the seasons when you have that foundation laid, you have those relationships built, people are able to communicate, and you know each other on the intimate level that you're discussing. You get to that problem, and everyone knows exactly what to do, and
Yeah,
it's
you can
so much
smash
better.
it.
Yeah,
Ideally, they know what to do.
yeah, sure.
Taking the actions is a different thing.
Yeah,
You gotta want to take the action.
exactly. Yeah, and so I was watching the video. I don't want to go into all of it because I want people to watch it, but there was one thing that stuck out to me. I don't remember which tip it was exactly, but you're discussing when or when not, and what kind of comments to give after a rep. And that's something that I find myself thinking about a lot, especially when I was first starting to teach. Is I felt like I had all of this information
Yep.
and I wanted to share it so badly. And I'm
Yeah.
staring at this 14-year-old kid who's been playing drums for a year maybe, and not that they were not smart or anything, but you certainly need to tailor what you're going to teach to the individual. And I would just shotgun
Yep.
blast everything I know. And I think there's a part of that you mentioned in your video where it's not intentional, but there's part of it that's almost like ego driven, in the sense that you want the student to know that you know these things, but the way you present it to them, they're just like, I can't apply any of this. This is way too much for me right now.
Yeah, the intentions are good. The
Yeah,
intentions are
yeah,
great. And it's like, I have the information. I'm here to teach you. I'm going to give you this information.
right.
Blah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I think it helps to understand where the individual is at in their drumming journey, or even in like a season. If they're barely learning like the what, it's
Hmm.
kind of difficult to teach them the how,
Exactly.
and they can only do one thing at a time. Like they can't fix all the problems at once. And I know that I'm guilty of announcing all of the problems at once. And once you start to overwhelm the student, they tune it out and they don't feel good. That's not motivating. That doesn't feel like an achievable goal, and it's very self-defeating when you can't keep up with the instructions that are being thrown your way. It's like why even try? I'm just going to
Yeah.
do this because my parents aren't going to pick me up for 2 more hours. And it's very easy to take someone in that direction. But if you can just give them one small thing and know that you have a lot more reps, you can fix those other things later. Just give them this one thing that they can achieve, that you know they can achieve, but is also an appropriate challenge. That can be motivating. And I like to let my students know, like, you're not making this happen today. I see that. You see that. Is this going to happen by finals? And they say yes. I'm like, all right, well, your feet are slow.
Yeah, and it's about creating, and I know you have a ton of opinions about this, about creating these realistic, manageable standards, which is really difficult because drum corps, at least I think traditionally has this culture built into it of perfection, which,
Oh yeah, the
again,
P
like,
word.
yeah, right, like you were saying earlier, I think the intentions are good. People get into this activity, and instructors and educators, they want what's best for their students. They want them to be the best versions of themselves, but it takes, a lot of this comes full circle into what you're saying about just knowing your student individually. It takes knowing that to be able to create this perfect standard that is difficult enough and challenging enough that it pushes them, but not so much so that they lose their motivation to do it. And
Yeah.
it's really hard to do that perfectly.
Yeah, I've heard so many students upset and like salty during meal breaks because it wasn't perfect. Or they're walking out of a
Right.
show and they're like, "Hey, this leg wasn't perfect." And everyone's throwing around the P word. And I really I used to use that word a lot because, like you said, it's kind of embedded in the culture a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, but realistically, human beings are imperfect creatures. So to expect perfection in any form out of an imperfect creature is just setting yourself up for failure. You literally will not achieve this ever. But you're going to
Hmm.
keep striving, and I feel like perfection is it's a good idea, it's a good concept. Like it gives you direction. But if we can strive for excellence, that sounds much more achievable than perfection. And excellence is something that a human being can achieve. And to the eye, perfection and excellence kind of look the same.
Right.
They sound the same, but I feel like one is healthier to think about.
Yeah. So how do you? I think a lot of the reason that people are maybe afraid to go down the road that you're discussing right now is they want to make sure that the student isn't given like a get out of jail free card to not do their best.
Hmm.
And something like excellence can be shaped into an infinite amount of different ways. And the student could, I think the fear is that the student could maybe prematurely reward themselves for doing work that isn't actually their best. So how do you, if you use, because you use excellence as kind of your standard, how
Uh-huh.
do you mitigate that?
Well, I'm not going to tell them something's excellent if it's not.
Right.
So that's something that has to be earned, and it's a very powerful word if you use it just the appropriate amount. If every rep is excellent, then the word loses its power. So it's good to remind them that we're striving for excellence. But just because we're striving for that doesn't mean that what you just did was excellent or was your best.
Right.
Um, I also like to emphasize that people can only do their best. They can't do more than that. And sometimes their best is not the excellence we're trying to achieve on finals night. Most of the time, that's the case.
Yeah.
And I like to start warm, especially like over a drum corps season in the morning. Like they don't know where they're at. It's 9 a.m. They got maybe 3, 4 hours of floor time. Someone was eating Cheetos till 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And I just want them to know, like, your bodies are tired, your minds are not awake yet, your blood is not flowing yet. I get that, and you get that. But one thing we can all do right now is just commit to doing your best. There's going to be ticks. There's absolutely going to be ticks. Play through it, warm up, and get your mind right. Because I feel like if you start the day off with the expectation that you're going to have finals night quality in the morning, it's going to set up a lot of frustrating repetitions.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounds like the what excellence is should, because you were talking about what your best is or what excellence is maybe in May is not what your best or excellence is in August. And so that
Mm-hmm.
takes like maybe a monthly or a weekly or a daily or an hourly shift of what the standard is. Like as a student hits a new threshold of their capabilities, the standard shifts accordingly to be like right above that or right at that to ensure that they're always on that upward trend.
Yeah. Sometimes, yeah, the standard, I feel like, is constantly rising. We've got to up our standard. So is the expectation. The expectation also shifts upward as the season progresses. And sometimes you can feel when somebody's not achieving the standard because their mind isn't in the right place. Maybe they have things going on outside of rehearsal that are taking a huge toll on them. And, there's many ways you could handle that situation. And I've found that, making time to talk to this person away from the rehearsal to see what's going on is much more effective than just calling them out right then and there, which is it's the instinct. It's like, bro or girl, come on. What are you doing right now? Like that's the instinct, that's the gut feeling. But it takes skill to not react to that. It takes skill to not react to that. I can acknowledge it and I can see it. Everyone around them can acknowledge it and see it. But there's a bigger issue there. And if this person isn't willing to share that or discuss that with you, it's going to stick there. And this will be a consistent problem that you notice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting the awareness to the situation that you're in or that the student is in, and if that situation will allow them to communicate effectively. I mean, this is kind of like a principle for any relationship, even outside of teaching or relationship with anyone, is that when there's a problem at hand, it's probably in everyone's best interest to wait until the chemicals stop flowing and people
Yes.
aren't so riled up to ensure that when the conversation happens, it can actually be successful.
that's that's it right there, man. That is it.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of patience, I think, because in those moments on either end, whether you're the member or you're the staff member, or these principles also apply from membership to membership or staff member to staff member. But when you're in that conflict, whatever it is, it does feel like your body is telling you, like, all right, do it right now. I say it right now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
almost always that turns out poorly.
Yeah, and it's totally normal to feel that.
Mhm.
That's normal, and it's good that you're feeling that because it means that you care about it. And I think it's important to understand that if you are feeling these emotions towards it, it's because you care. Um, but by reacting to that in the moment, eventually I have started to see patterns where, like, all right, I reacted to this, it didn't go well. Now there's more drama. Now there's more tension. And it's a pattern, you learn through experience, you start to recognize things, and then eventually you have to make a change or not. But when you decide to make that change, now you have an opportunity to assess a different outcome. And I have noticed that by waiting, the outcome is much more beneficial for the drum corps, the entire ensemble.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah, pretty much every experience I've had as a teacher and a membership would add up for that to be true. I mean, when the problems certainly persist when the timing of the solution is not correct.
Yeah, but sometimes people need to get called out. Sometimes that has to happen, but I feel like if that happens every day,
You become
especially
numb
to,
to
like,
it.
exactly, they don't care. They don't care. And especially if they don't have that relationship with you where they want to make you happy. Like, if they don't care about your opinion of them or how you view them, they're not going to care if you call them out. It's when they don't want to disappoint you that you have to understand you have this option here, and you can probably only use it once or twice
Yeah,
a
yeah,
season. And so really pick and choose when it is. It's like, did you ever play Pokemon, the Master Ball?
yeah.
And you only get like one. Sorry, super sidetrack.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. You don't want to
Like,
use it at the wrong time.
you don't want to use your Master Ball on a Caterpie, right?
Yeah,
So my nephew's getting into Pokemon, so now he's talking about it nonstop, and so it's kind of like
it's bringing it back.
it's bringing it back. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. And this is like, I mean, I don't have children, but I imagine this is a concept with parenting, and you can only get to a 10. So if you're functioning at like a 9, a 10 doesn't seem so bad, and there's nothing with it. But if you
Hmm.
function at like a 2 or a 3,
Yeah.
when you get to a 6, it gets everyone's attention. You
Yeah.
don't have to go so high. And I think the other thing that I'm thinking about is you keep coming back to, what does the student think about you, and how does that impact their desire to want to do right by you? And I think that
Uh-huh.
goes hand in hand with what you're talking about with this early season personal investment in the
Yeah.
student, to
Hmm.
ensure that when you say something to them, or when you're trying to have one of those, you know likely difficult conversations that's talking about the problems that they have, which can be difficult for a person to have, you have that relationship established that allows for that person to feel comfortable. And when you eventually, or potentially give some sort of advice, they want to apply it, and they want to see you be happy with their actions.
Hmm. Yeah. So then if they're doing that, it's also on you to fulfill your end of the bargain. Like, if they're doing things to try and please you, you gotta let them know.
Right.
It's okay to be excited over uh, a dirty rep where everyone kept their feet in time. It's
Yeah.
a, it's okay to be excited for a dirty rep where, like, everyone lifted up on the direction change. Even though they all hear in derp, it's like, but you all did what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And that goes back to that standard of perfection I think you're talking about, is, and this is maybe another part of the drum corps culture, although I do feel this shifting positively. There's a lot of things that I think the norms
Oh
of
yeah,
drum corps that are going in a very, very good direction, just from my observations of,
mine too.
being in it from an educator and a designer, relative to when I was a member and seeing the positive trends. But, um, there was this culture, maybe still to some extent, this culture of, it's either right or you get yelled at. But there's not like this side of it where it's like, oh, that was really good. It's like, if you did it right, it's this standard of, well, that's what you were supposed to do.
Not do it again.
Yeah. Like, don't feel good about the fact that that was really clean, because that's what it should always be. So it's like either neutral response or negative response, instead of the whole spectrum. Like, hey, that was like kind of what you're talking about, making specific goals for a day. Like, hey, the goal right now is that we all nail this direction change. And knowing that by establishing that goal, there may be a couple other things that get a little bit worse for a second, just because of the shift in
Hmm.
focus, and that's okay. And that you can provide positive feedback and a reward system
Hmm.
for the membership when those happen.
Yeah, and I think another excellent little goal like that is, like, everybody hit the release note of that crescendo triplet roll in time. Hit it on the downbeat. That's the goal. So if you hear like, it's like, okay, I'll work with that.
Right.
I'll work with that. It will clean up, but just know that what you're ending. That's what you're aiming for.
Yeah. Yeah. It's those micro goals and those micro standards, I think, create these small feelings of satisfaction for the membership, which I
Mm-hmm.
don't think should be overlooked, because usually the season starts and the goal is like either make finals or win or be perfect, but it's something around that, second Saturday in August. And you have all of this time where you like to evaluate if you're on
Yeah.
track or not is like nearly impossible,
Yeah.
unless you create these micro goals like you're discussing, which, it's important when you're in that grind to be able to leave a block or a rep or anything occasionally and feel like we did good work. That was a good job.
Oh,
And we are
those
on
feel
track.
excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, those feel so good as a member. And we've all felt those before.
Yeah.
Be nice to feel it more often.
Certainly.
Those feel good, and they're motivating, and it just keeps everyone's attitude positive. And their vibes are positive, and when people are having fun, they're having a good time, they're gonna work harder. They're gonna work harder than if they're all angry at each other.
Yeah. And establishing that focus also gives a universal place to put the attention. Like you can't just, I mean, you can, but you maybe shouldn't just start a block and say the goal is to be perfect, start to, top to bottom. And then when the tick inevitably happens, which it will, then it's like, well, this block was a failure and therefore like a waste of time. And it's like,
Yeah.
man, that's a lot. I mean, you could imagine the trillions of throughout a whole drum corps and like, let's say it's a 3-hour ensemble block, the trillions of an infinite number of things that are happening on a micro level. One of them is not going to be perfect
Yeah.
always.
Yep.
And so if it's like an all or nothing thing, you I I feel like you would start to perpetuate this culture of failure. Like, oh, we didn't do it. We came up short. We came up short. And it's very difficult to do that for an extended period of time and for it not to affect the vibe or the culture of the ensemble.
Yeah, there are some people who resonate with that feeling of just like, oh, I need to do it better next time. Oh, it can be better next time.
Yeah.
There are some people who vibe with that, and it's important to tread waters carefully when you go in that direction. But not everybody functions that way. Not everybody functions that way.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's necessarily black or white, because I like when I'm thinking about when I was practicing, when I was a member, or the way that I try to create culture for students, I do kind of I want the mindset to be that it can always be better, but I think
Hmm.
that mindset can coexist with the thought process like, but that was still really good. Like, hey,
Yeah.
that was good. That was excellence for what we're capable of right now. Like, we should take a moment and validate that, but also we have 2 more months. So there needs to be a new standard now. There needs to be a new
just
better.
just be a little better than you were yesterday.
Yeah,
That's all you need to do. Just a little better than yesterday.
right.
Not the same, a little better.
And that would, I mean, over the course of a whole summer, if you could, if you could get like a graph of that's measuring like time relative to like ability level, it never looks like this.
No.
Never. Honestly, a lot of times it looks like this with like all these bumps depending upon
Uh-huh.
relationships
Yep.
and you got to be aware of that, I think. And like you're saying, if you could actually just be, even if it was just a little bit, just maintain everything you've done so far and just get a little better, you'd be the best drum corps ever. That's like nearly
Uh-huh.
impossible to do.
It You can increase the chance of that happening by understanding who you're working with. If you don't understand who they are, then no way is that going to happen.
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of that is it also helps you maintain the progress made, because a lot of times you get on those upward trends, and then there's one of the problems we've been discussing, like a non-necessary standard or a poor relationship or something, and to get that one next tick out, you sacrifice a month of progress, or to get that tick out, you make a certain relationship so poor that you basically guarantee that you're not getting any more out after that.
For that one tick.
Yeah, just for that one tick. You sacrifice the whole summer. And that sounds silly, but I have seen that happen many times. That exact
Mm-hmm.
thing. The situation to get a certain air out of the show is handled in such a way that it causes this exponential backlash.
Mm-hmm. That one tick.
Yeah.
It's as an instructor, it's kind of like, all right, this is your show. This is not my show. If you want to tick in your show, like you hear it. You hear it. You're either gonna do something about it or you're not. And if this person is not gonna do something about it, they must not really care to be there.
Yeah. And how do you and a lot of what we're talking about is how do you make them care to be there? Because that's such an important thing when you establish this culture that you're discussing and you have these relationships, the job almost gets done on its own because the student wants to be there and they want to learn and they want to do right by you and they want to do right by their peers and all those things, and then all of these potential problems just never happen, or if they do, they're solved much more easily.
Yeah. So in the drum corps setting, time is very limited for the individual, like their time.
Mm-hmm.
There's the drum corps time, and then there's the personal time. And sometimes people they just need to disconnect. They need to take a break. Like they've been practicing all day, and now they're expected to go hack out some more,
Mm-hmm.
for another hour and a half out of their 2 hours of free time, and then they're gonna show up to the lot like super burnt out. Um, what I like to do is just mention to them, can you spend like 10, 15 minutes working on this part? That's it. Just 10 to 15 minutes. That way, it's a realistic goal. I'm not saying work this until you can't play it anymore, but they hear that I'm observing this consistent error, and 10 to 15 minutes is totally doable, and it doesn't have to be perfect by the end, but just put in some extra time on that. And the next day, if it's still there, then I'll consider telling them again. I kind of like to see what they do first. And, many times I've found that they'll take it upon themselves. At that point, if you just offer little suggestions, little nudges, they'll start to take it upon themselves to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point with the because I think anyone who's marched drum corps has, and some drum corps live and die on this, and some don't do it at all. Is like the lunch break practicing, like taking the one small break you have in your day and filling it with more practicing. And I don't know that it's difficult because I don't know that that's inherently wrong. I also don't know that it's inherently right. And I think a lot of it is relative to the individual. I was someone I
Yes.
just practiced a
Yes.
lot, and I'm not saying that
Mm-hmm.
to sound like everyone should do that. I really just have fun practicing, and the people that
Uh-huh.
I march drum corps with can certainly attest to this. Like I was the one drumming on my pad late
Oh,
at
yeah.
night, probably when I shouldn't have been. Like maybe frustrating
Everyone's
some
trying
people
to
trying to
sleep.
sleep. Yeah, exactly.
Great.
I was that one, and I don't know that everyone should do that. I don't even know if I should have done that, but that being said, I would do that. Like I would practice a lot, and some people wouldn't, but they were doing what they needed. Like they were giving
Mm-hmm.
themselves the rest that they needed, and they would still perform at a super high level. And
Mm-hmm.
and everything kind of comes back to this knowing yourself or the individual, the student, the teacher, whoever, on such a finite level that whatever you say to them is perfectly crafted for them. Like maybe that one student
Yeah.
needs 10 or 15 minutes on the lunch break, and maybe they want to. Maybe another student, that would not be a good idea for them because they really need that 10 to 15 minutes of rest. And it's a lot more work on the teaching end or the coaching end of
Yes.
things to
Yeah.
make everything you want to say perfectly tailored to the person,
It
right?
it takes so much effort.
Yeah, it does. And you can think about those times where a roll is dirty, and from the box you get like the snares, you're slow on the roll, and it's like, okay, well you and I say this and I'm totally guilty of saying this, but you just gave a very general comment to 9 people or 8 people or whoever,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and they may not have all been slow. One of them may have been fast. You
Uh-huh.
don't even
Oh,
know. And
yeah.
now you got 8 or 9 people just playing faster.
Yeah.
And how much faster should you play, right? Like
Yeah.
play faster. Like, I mean, if the roll's at 160 and you're in a world-class drum line, I mean, most of those people can play rolls well into the 200s.
Yeah.
Like, do they go all the way? Do they go 10%? Like, it's really difficult, but you start to, when you're trying to reach a level of excellence that most, or that all drum corps are, you start to understand how fine-tuned your comments have to be. to fix only the problem at hand and guarantee that you don't introduce any new problems.
Yes. That happens a lot.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. Put out one fire, out pops another one. Just a nonstop day of putting out fires.
Yeah, exactly. And something interesting that I think that you bring up a good amount is this like aura of patience when things happen, which I think is really important because you have these gut reactions, whether it's to diagnose the error at hand or if it's to maybe get involved with a conflict where it might not be the right time, and just pressing that pause button every once in a while, like you're saying, serves you well. Like you hear the roll is like maybe the roll is bad and you're like, I think that's slow, but the only thing you say, and I think you actually, I know you mentioned this in the coaching video you posted, is you just don't say anything.
Yep.
Like I
they
may
hear
not
it.
be, yeah. And also, as I may not be 100% positive what that error was. And if that's the case, I don't want to say anything and potentially change it up. So reset, and you kind of, you keep alluding to waiting and just making sure you understand the problem at hand. Also, the other thing to consider is, back to the inability for human beings to be perfect. Sometimes the snare line will be slow or whatever, it'll be dirty, or whatever section is not playing up to par, and nothing needs to be said. Every member at hand knows exactly what it was because their training is there, and you can just say reset, and that's enough. And you just give them one more chance, and maybe it was just a fluke. But it's easy as an educator to maybe make something out of nothing. Like they had this fluke rep, and then there's the cut, and there's the 20-minute chew out session for an error that if you just said reset, everyone would fix it.
Oh yeah, man. I agree. Hit the nail on the head. Some of my favorite instructors are the ones that said the least. The ones where some of my favorite instructors where I felt like I gained the most are from people who said the least. Because that, by refraining from, reacting, that patience, it communicates a sense of trust to the performer. Sometimes it just takes a look. Like you hear that roll, you're looking at the line and you go, and then they look at you, and they're like, I got it. And like,
okay. I know.
Yes, that's all. Sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah, and it's there's something to be said about the frequency of your comments and the validity that necessitates after. Like we were talking about, how your emotional norms pan out. Like we were talking about, like functioning at a 9 on the emotional spectrum, I guess, and how that maybe isn't the best place to be. But if you're saying something after every single rep, it starts to make it feel like then maybe you don't have much to say because it's just so much. I think of there's two people that come to mind. One of them is Elon Musk, and I listened to him on a podcast, and I was blown away by how slowly and deliberately he spoke. And he would just put pauses in his phrases that for most individuals were way too long. But when he said the next thing, it made you feel like because he had that patience and because he took that time, what he is about to say is very important. And like on the drum corps field, when the staff member that you're describing, the patient one, the one that's waiting, when they finally speak, you can just see everyone look like, okay, they're going to talk now. And that's difficult to be that person. And I certainly strive to be better at that as someone who talks a lot and very quickly a lot of the time.
No, we all do.
Yeah, and you get excited and
that's what it is. It's excitement.
Yeah.
It's excitement and it's passion, and it comes from the greatest of places.
Yeah.
But it's not always productive.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I feel like in all scenarios of life, that pause button, that little space, just ensuring like, is what I'm about to say necessary? And is this the right place to say it? And is it going to come out the way I want it to? And is it going to have the desired outcome?
Yeah. And the slower you speak, the more time your brain has to compute the words that are coming out of your mouth. Because I also get excited. And when I start to speak really fast, I'll stutter, fumble my words. And then that's not an effective delivery most of the time for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can relate a lot to that. I come from a long line of fast talkers. And that's one thing with the podcast that's interesting is especially when I first started, I could not slow down. I was speaking so quickly. And then when I would listen back to it, or I would like play it for people who ask for feedback or something, they'd be like, dude, I don't know what you're saying. This is so much so fast. And I know that is something for me that I struggle with. And it's probably, to some extent, it's probably something that a lot of people struggle with. Because there's only a handful of people that I can think of off the top of my head that the pattern of their speech is so deliberate and so good that they could be saying anything. And I'm just completely fascinated in what they're saying.
It helps. It helps the
Yeah.
listener
Yes,
because
it does.
it's one thing for the sound vibrations to hit your eardrum. It's another thing to comprehend what this person is actually communicating. Because there's what we say, there's what people hear. Sorry, there's what we say, there's what we mean to say. There's what people hear, there's what they think we mean to
Right.
say. So many things can just get, twisted in this
Yeah. Lost in
conversation.
translation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That slower and more deliberate it is, the easier it is for the listener to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, definitely. And you bring up a good point in your video too, where you talk about as a staff member, awareness to other staff members, or maybe the situation at
Oh
hand.
yeah.
Like, I think we've all been in a situation where, maybe there's my mind goes to like a drill change or a music change, and you're thrown into it. Like, okay, we're going to change 15 sets of drill today, and we have a show in 2 hours. And so your focus as a member is at one place, which is at what are
Yep.
my new dots. That's all. And everyone has a certain amount of bandwidth. Like, this is
Uh-huh.
the only thing that I can think about right now. And then you have the tech
Yes.
staff members. It's like, snares that, the grace notes are too
That
high.
roll.
And you're like, I cannot even begin to think about what you're saying right now. And it's again, like we keep saying, a lot of times it does come from a good place. They are trying to help. But as an
Mm-hmm.
educator, as a teacher, or as a coach, it's necessary to know where, like, what is my student's capacity for learning more right now. And sometimes
Uh-huh.
it's best to just go, I probably need to not speak for 30 minutes because of how
Yep.
overloaded they are and what they're
Yep.
thinking about. Even if what I said was the most perfectly crafted comment of all time, they won't be able
Yep.
to apply it right now.
Yep. They need some space.
Mm-hmm.
They need space to figure it out. And sometimes if we get too close and we start crowding them with feedback, it just feels very confining to them. It creates
Yeah.
a very stressful environment. And space is healthy. It's
Yeah.
good. It's good to get away from the groups for a little bit, get some
Yeah.
time.
I was so I'm reading this book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. And in the book, they were talking about this study they were doing when Sesame Street was being aired, and they were trying to like
Nice.
figure out the attention span of kids, like little kids.
Oh man, yeah.
And they were figuring out all the times. They were like using this eye study. I can't remember the specifics of what it was called. And they could basically figure out if the student was, or if the child was paying attention or not based on where they were looking. And if they looked away from the
Yes.
screen, what was going on that made them do that. And almost all of the time, in one way or another, the thing that took their eyes away from the screen was this feeling of not understanding. Like the
Yes.
concept at hand, or the amount of things going on the screen was so much that they were like, I don't get this. And immediately they looked away from the screen. They stopped caring. And I think that's really applicable to this, because when you get to that information overload standpoint, where you got all these staff members telling you things as a student, and you're trying to do your best, but there's so much, you're going to reach a point where it's like, I'm done. I can't, none of this makes any sense to me. And it's not only that you won't apply it, it actually starts to create this feeling of frustration and potentially anger, because
Oh
now
yeah.
you almost feel stupid
Yeah.
because all these things are being said to you and you can't apply them, when in reality it has nothing to do with your intellect. It has to do with this bombardment of information.
Yeah. You can't do it all at once.
Yeah.
The world wasn't built in a day.
Yeah. Yeah, man, but it's hard. It is really difficult. And you keep alluding to the fact that these are lessons learned for you, and I can relate to that too. About you find yourself. We say these things of like, yeah, you shouldn't do this, and then I think of all these times where I'm at jump core and I do
Oh yeah.
exactly this, and I'm like,
I've
man, I
yeah.
wish I would stop doing this. Like, I wish I could learn
Yeah.
from this a little faster.
It takes time. And also takes recognizing patterns. Just because you do it once and you get a certain outcome that is not necessarily what you wanted, you might do it again,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get the outcome that you didn't want it. And sometimes you're not able to see that it's not the outcome you wanted.
Yeah.
But over time, you start to recognize the pattern, like, oh, maybe I should change something.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does take time. It takes time, and it takes a lot of deliberate experience, like putting yourself in situations intentionally and thinking about these things, whether you're the educator or the student or whatever, to ensure that you're actually being able to work on them intentionally.
Yeah. And that kind of that makes me think about the process of learning new skills as an educator, like learning how to do new things where you personally experience failure in some form, and you can see that you're trying your hardest and you're trying to put all these pieces together. Maybe what you're doing is too advanced for where you're at,
Yeah.
and because you're new and maybe you don't have any guidance, you don't understand that yet, so you just kind of fail over and over again. You get frustrated because you don't understand why you can't do the thing. um, Sometimes it's just the thing. Maybe the thing you're doing needs to be tweaked a little bit to fit where you're at in your journey.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the teaching and coaching element comes in, being able to identify where this person is at in their journey and give them the appropriate challenge that they need.
Yeah. Yeah. I like you bring up the, like intentionally putting yourself in positions of failure. And I think that's really important for an educator or a coach of any kind to make sure you always have that empathy for the student. Because I think that we all, in most people who are teaching world-class drum corps, or indoor or whatever it is, had a pretty successful marching career themselves, the majority of them. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we all look back on our past with this rose-colored lens of like, oh, I did all these
Yeah.
awesome things, and you forget like the days where you were awful and you just were blowing up, and if you don't keep reminding yourself like, oh yeah, this is what it's like to be a human being, we fail over and over again. Without that
Yeah.
empathy, I don't know that the educator is truly equipped for the situation to teach properly, because that's when the frustration sets in. You give the comment and it's not applied immediately and perfected, and then you go, well, what's wrong with you? And it's like,
Uh-huh.
you've missed a lot so far with that statement.
Uh-huh. I have found for me that learning how to jump rope has taught me more about teaching drums than any other form of exercise. Like, it's very rhythmic. You use your forearms to create the revolution, use your wrist, and timing is super important. You got your foot timing, you got your hand timing,
Yeah.
and they need to be connected in a certain way. Sometimes one hand is working harder than the other hand, even though they need to be playing in unison. And sometimes you're just not focused on the sound. You're not focused on what you're feeling. Your body's tense. Your mind is who knows where, and you just keep tripping over yourself, getting whipped by the rope. And when you take the time to, calm down and slow it down, actually feel the weight of the rope in your hand, listen to the sounds around you, listen to that. You just put yourself in this orb of focus. And when you find the flow, it feels so good. It feels so good. But when you're not in that flow, you can just see it. It's like whoosh, 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 whoosh. Just got all these lashings across my body. And it's a good reminder that, intense focus is challenging. It's challenging. You can go in with the intention of having focus, but to actually do it and find flow, it's tough. It's tough. And if what you're doing is too hard for you in the moment, you're not going to find the flow.
Yeah.
What you're doing has to be achievable and feel good and have the right amount of challenge to it, based on like speed that you're doing it, um, the frequency of the trick or the rudiment that you're doing. You can space out what you're learning. It doesn't have to be like bah, 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 bah. Cool trick, bah, 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 bah. So it's taught me a lot.
Yeah, and I think the reason it probably works for you so well is that it's not drumming, because you
Mm-hmm.
have this thing that you've been in the marching arts for a good amount of time, and you have been on this upward trend. You're learning more as an individual, as a player, as a musician, as a teacher, and so you really can't be a novice anymore in that field. Maybe on like certain topics you can learn things like that, but in general, you are in the upper echelon of the activity. And so diversifying your involvement with things, getting involved in things that aren't in the marching arts to ensure that you can still take on that beginner novice role consistently.
Yeah, that's that's important, man. That is so important. Plus, it's like, yeah, you're in the music world and you have this awesome skill. It's fantastic. You've spent hours upon hours honing in on this craft. But if you can only apply those skills in that craft, like how much of your life is going to happen outside of that?
Right.
And is that part of your life also going to be as great and fulfilling? Or are you only going to find fulfillment when you're doing this one thing? So to take those concepts and apply them to everything else in your day, I feel like contributes to a sense of happiness, a sense of happiness. And when you can feel that sense of happiness outside of rehearsal, you're going to bring that into rehearsal as well. And it makes you exciting to members. You know, people enjoy being around people who are happy and positive. People enjoy that. And if we're trying to create this atmosphere, this educational environment of encouragement and positivity, you kind of have to walk the walk.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, man, and it's you were talking about how you apply the concept to like different mediums and how that creates bigger understanding. And I think, I mean, your mediums, at least some of them, are the marching arts and jump roping, but it could be anything. I mean, like, you have this concept of how do you set reasonable goals or standards, right? Like, that's like one of the things we've been
Mm-hmm.
discussing. Well, what does that look like inside of the marching arts? What does that look like inside of jump roping? What does it look like inside of jujitsu or something, or anything,
Mm-hmm.
or anything at all? And you aren't just telling other people how to understand that concept. You're using it personally because you're in a new field and having to figure those things out again, which I think is really valuable.
Yeah, a good point. I didn't think of it that way, but that is it.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's something to be said about you use the phrase walk the walk, about taking these principles or whatever your mantras are for yourself as an educator, and making sure that you're applying them to yourself, and really, just
Mm-hmm.
if for nothing else, just to vet them and make sure they're true. Because if you're
Yeah.
if you're pushing these ideals on people, making sure they're valid is pretty important, and finding that finding consistent success in ideas, through different people and through different mediums, is validation that they are probably true.
Mm-hmm. And people, they watch to see what you're doing.
Yeah.
If I'm placing professional expectations on these people, they're gonna look at me and like, is he placing professional expectations on himself?
Right.
Especially like the younger, like the high schoolers, they think a lot. And when you're that age, you don't have a lot of life experience outside. Not all high schoolers. I can't give a generalized statement like that, but typically that young mind um, hasn't had enough life experience to recognize the patterns in the world. So they'll see things and they'll just jump to the furthest conclusion
Yeah.
possible,
Yeah.
and they start to shape their image of you. So I think it's important to show them that you know I'm also living by these mantras I'm trying to
Yeah.
communicate to you.
Yeah. It's a necessity, I think. It's like the pot calling the kettle black, like telling people to do things that you're not doing, or telling them to, hey, here's what you should be doing, but I never did it. It makes them feel like,
Mm-hmm.
well, if you're not even going to apply the advice that you're telling me,
And
it
why
makes
would
me
I
feel
do
like,
it?
yeah, it makes me feel like, well, why would it even be applied? And there's
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot to be said about that, and a lot of that is, it goes back to you were talking about creating relationships with students and who they, and I believe you talk about this in your video as well, who they perceive you to be, your appearance, your
Mm-hmm.
ideals, how you take care of yourself, all of those things, it becomes like the representation of your ideas. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is who I am trying to
Yeah.
create myself into being because this is the way that I think. And if you are, teaching one way and living another way as a student, it becomes difficult to
Mm-hmm.
believe or subscribe to what the person is saying.
Yep. 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 Yep.
Yeah. And again, that's just another thing that puts more responsibility on the teacher. I mean, a lot of what we discussed so far is just making the job of an educator or a coach that much harder because it's so
Yeah.
much more investment in the student and it's more investment in yourself. But I do think that you see that return on investment. You apply that time and you make yourself hopefully the representation of your own ideals and you're creating these
Yeah.
relationships. And then the reality that comes from that is so much easier to live in and you don't have to deal with so many things that you would have
Oh
otherwise.
yeah. Yep. And I think it helps to really take a hard look at the expectations you're placing on other people as well as the expectations you're placing on yourself.
Mm,
Because if you can't even achieve your own expectations, then you're probably projecting that onto students as well. But if
yeah.
you can learn, like, all right, I want to do it all, I can't do it all. So my students probably can't do it all either. So I need to meet them where they're at. Got to meet them where they're at and maybe adjust personal expectations. Like there's so many things that I wish I could do. I wish I was excellent at, but like until you put the time in, you're not going to get there. And like in my mind, I can picture myself being like a pro at all these things, but
Hmm.
that takes time and effort, and I can't put in all that time into everything. So I need to like reduce the amount of things I'm doing and see like what can actually fit into a day. There's only like 168 hours in a week. That's it. Everybody's got that same amount.
Yeah.
Got to sleep. Minus 52.
Yeah. But
112 hours
you've already
left.
done this math. This isn't the
I've
first time you're
I've
thinking
I've
about
done this.
this.
I've actually done this with my students before
Yeah.
for winter percussion. I was like, all right, everybody grab a piece of paper and a pencil. This is like day one
Yeah.
auditions. And I said, there's 168 hours. Write the number 168. I want you all to sleep. Sleep is important. I know you're in high school. I know it's tough. Let's just go best case scenario here. You're sleeping 8 hours, 7 days a week. That's 56 hours. Subtract that. You're at 112 hours now. And then from there, I'll say, what are some other responsibilities you have in your week? And I'm listening to them. They're like, school. Okay, how many hours do you spend a week in school? Boom, write that down. We have rehearsal. How many hours are we spending in rehearsal every week? All right, write that down. But you need time to get to rehearsal and you need time to prepare for
Yeah.
rehearsal and time to go home. How much time does that take you? Let's say it's this amount. And we'll just walk through every possible thing they can think of. Homework. How much time do you need to spend on the homework for each class? Subtract that. And then by the end of the exercise, I want to ask them, like, who here still has 20 plus hours left in their week? And you get like maybe half the hands that go up. Like, that's great. This is totally achievable for you. This is accounting for practice time, you know?
Yeah.
And also like home practice time has been budgeted into this number. All right, who here has between 15 to 20 hours left? And you see some hands go up. Who here has 10 hours left? Who here has less than 5 hours left in their week?
Yeah.
And you see some hands go up. And this is a real thing. Like there are students who are doing all of these things and they want to be in winter percussion. And I was like, okay, you need to know one, that this is possible. Mathematically, this is possible. Now, understand your life is not always going to be as binary as this exercise is making it to be, but understand that you don't have a lot of wiggle room for the next 4 months. Like you're going to have to grind. You're going to have to do this. And a lot of times, those are some of the greatest students.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes back to what you're talking about is with knowing the individual. And I've done something similar. I had a lesson this week, and I was talking with my student, and I certainly didn't go into the detail that you did, which is really good. I like that. I'm definitely going to start using that. But I start to make sure that, because most of the time, if someone, especially outside of like a school that I work with directly, is coming to me for lessons, they're already pretty motivated and practice a good amount. And I was just kind of talking about, they always pretty much have these lofty goals, make one of these, big drum corps. And I like to frame, here are at least some of the sacrifices I think you're going to have to make to be able to give yourself the time to be able to practice. And then we start separating. I don't remember where I learned this exercise from. It's very similar to what you're talking about, where you basically just give an hour by, you live a day like you always would, and you just do like a minute by minute or hour by hour breakdown of your whole day. And then you just start throwing into categories necessary or unnecessary. And like necessary,
Yeah.
food, sleep, health, both physically and mentally, like you're talking about,
Yep.
potentially school. And then you have unnecessary, which becomes this category of things that you have to be willing to stop doing so that it can be supplemented
Yes.
with whatever work is necessary. So that's like, potentially playing video games
Yep.
or whatever it is. And that's not to say that leisure isn't important occasionally, or that you couldn't play
You got
video
to
games
balance it.
responsibly. Yeah, you got to balance it. Sometimes you actually need a break. Sometimes you actually
Yes.
need to stop working at what you're doing. That's
Yep.
very important, and you should have an activity for that. But it's just about making the lifestyle intentional and ensuring that what you're doing every day, like, this is what I should be doing. Like, if I'm asleep right now, I need to be asleep. I need to be resting. Or if I'm going to eat whatever it is, if I'm going to put this in my body, this is what I need to put in my body. Or if I'm going to practice, or if I'm going to play video games, or if I'm going to do work or go to school, whatever it is, your life becomes this thought out, scrutinized list of things that you need to be doing. It makes you feel so much better. And it makes you not rob yourself of the enjoyment of, it makes you not rob yourself of the enjoyment of your leisure. Like you can sleep. A lot of people struggle, I think, sleeping for a full amount of time because they feel stressed about not getting enough things done during the day. But if you've laid out your day intentionally, like I already have my practice time, and my practice time that I want is already allotted in combination with me getting 8 hours of sleep. So I don't have to feel any guilt about sleeping for 8 hours.
Yeah. Or stopping your practice session.
Yeah. Right.
Because you put in the work, and it's like you can only get so good in the day.
Yeah.
You can only get so good in the day. Yeah, I've definitely gone through and categorized like things that are going to happen, things that not happen. This is happening right now. This is not happening right now.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to communicate that it's about aiming for consistency in that approach. It's very likely not going to be perfect. As badly as we want to, like, say, I'm going to write this, I'm going to do it this way every single time. It's like, yeah, that'll probably last for a good like 4 or 5 days, but it comes down to just, staying consistent with it. It's okay to have little flubs here and there. Totally fine. We're human beings. But if you always have that home base that you can go back to, at least know what the right way to do it is. If you've never defined what the best way for you to do things is, you won't even know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man. Yeah, this is a lot. And this is, this is a glimpse into the way I think people have to think about themselves, whether they're on a personal journey to become a better musician, or if this is an educator trying to become a better educator, or all of these things. I think what shows up continuously is the amount of investment and time spent thinking and working on these things to be able to actually achieve what they are. And these things do not come easy. And, even, we're having this conversation, and we're both have been active in some capacity in marching arts for a good amount of time. But these things, I personally, I mess these things up all the time. I'll have it.
Oh yeah. Me too.
And I think, I think it's worth noting to ensure that, there's not a huge, I always fear, and, I fear it because I've experienced, I think everyone has this fall off of your personal journey after a failure of some kind. Like, you feel like you had a rough day, and it's like, all right, I can't do it then. Like, I had a rough day. And it's like, well, you're just doing exactly what every other human being does, which is have rough days occasionally. And yeah, I think the way that you think about the marching arts, and even outside of these more general concepts, is the way people should be thinking about this stuff. I mean, I think it leads to this direction of positivity and growth that I think is really valuable for people.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. And I also feel like, having conversations like you and I, they make people better. Like both of us right now are growing as human
Yeah.
beings and educators by having this conversation. You know,
Yeah.
just like I told you last time. Last time I spoke to you, I was so inspired, man. I was so inspired. I was like, I have a new mission. You know, I feel a strong sense of purpose, and you know, having these conversations with people, they help. They help. You got to surround yourself with people that can have these kind of conversations.
Yeah, definitely. All right, man. Well, let's wrap this thing up. It's been a little bit over an hour. We're good to go. So can you
Yeah.
one more time just remind everybody where they can find your stuff? Because I know you're putting out new content and you got jump roping
Oh yeah.
content. We didn't even get to go
Oh
into that
yeah.
much, so hopefully people can check that out. So
Yeah.
where
So
can they find you?
if you check out YouTube, go to YouTube. My channel name is Daniel Recoder. I also post some stuff on Instagram at DREC815. It's my birthday.
Nice.
DREC815. Those are pretty much the two platforms where I post most of my stuff at.